Welcome, time travelers. SolaTales here, and tonight's adventure takes us straight to the northern lights, dancing above the calm fjords of medieval Norway, where we'll follow a gentle Norse trader and his merchant ship on a peaceful journey beneath the aurora's magical glow. So, dim the lights, sit back, and relax. The fjord stretched before Bjorn Eriksson like a mirror made of silver and shadows, its surface so still that not even the gentlest ripple disturbed the reflection of the towering cliffs that rose on either side. The year was 985 by the Christian reckoning, though Bjorn thought more in terms of seasons and tides than numbered years. Late autumn had settled over the Norwegian waters near what would one day be called Bergen, and the air carried that particular crispness that spoke of winter's patient approach. Bjorn's Gnur, his faithful merchant vessel, moved through the water with the quiet grace of a swan. She was 54 feet from stem to stern, her shallow draft perfect for navigating these protected waterways that carved deep into the heart of Norway. Her overlapping planks, fitted together in the time-honored clinker method his grandfather had taught him, were sealed with pine tar that gleamed dark against the pale oak. The ship had been his companion for more than 15 seasons now, and he knew every creak of her timbers, every subtle shift in her movement through the water. The cargo hold was filled with treasures that spoke of distant lands and patient craftsmanship. Amber from the shores of the Baltic Sea lay wrapped in soft woolen cloth, some pieces clear as mountain streams, others cloudy with ancient mysteries, and a few precious specimens that held the perfectly preserved forms of insects from forests that had vanished long before his great-grandfather's time. The amber ranged in color from pale honey to deep orange, and when the light caught them just right, they seemed to hold tiny suns within their depths. Silver arm rings rested in careful rows, each one marked with the precise weight that made them valuable, not just as ornaments, but as currency. The silver had been tested and weighed according to the strict standards that govern trade throughout the northern lands. Some bore the intricate knotwork patterns favored by the smiths of Dublin, while others carried the clean geometric designs preferred in the trading towns along the Baltic coast. Woolen cloth filled another section of the hold, dyed in rich colors that spoke of distant meadows and careful craft. The deep red came from madder root, ground and boiled with such patience that the color would never fade, even after years of wear. Blue cloth had been colored with woad, that precious plant that grew in the southern lands and commanded prices that made even experienced traders pause. Green fabric showed the skilled hand of dyers who knew the secret of combining weld and woad to create the color of deep forest shadows. Walrus ivory combs lay wrapped in the softest leather, their teeth carved so fine they felt like silk against the skin. Each comb represented hours of patient work by craftsmen who lived at the edge of the world, where the great tusked beasts hauled themselves onto mice floes under the midnight sun. The ivory was white as fresh snow, smooth as water-worn stone, and precious beyond measure in lands where such materials were rarer than silver. As evening approached, Bjorn went through the familiar ritual of preparing for the night. He checked each tie that held his cargo secure, running practiced hands over the ropes to ensure nothing had worked loose during the day's gentle journey. The woolen sail had been lowered and carefully folded, every pleat precise to prevent unnecessary wear. His small cooking fire contained in a box of sand to protect the ship's timbers, had been banked with the kind of attention that came from long experience of nights spent on the water. The construction of his Nur represented generations of accumulated wisdom about how to build ships that could handle both the rough waters of the open sea and the gentle currents of protected fjords. Her planks overlapped like scales on a fish, each one carefully shaped and fitted to its neighbors. Rivets of iron held everything together with a strength that had been tested by countless storms and seasons. The design was so perfectly suited to these northern waters that ships built on the same pattern had carried Norse traders and explorers to lands that lay beyond the edge of most people's imagination. The amber in his hold represented one of the most important trade routes in his world. It began on the distant shores of the Baltic, where patient gatherers walked the beaches after storms, searching for the golden tears of ancient trees. From there, the amber traveled south and west along paths that had been worn smooth by centuries of traders' feet, eventually reaching markets in lands where people had never seen the northern seas, but treasured these pieces of captured sunlight. Navigation in these waters required a different kind of knowledge than the techniques needed for crossing open ocean. Here, Bjorn relied on an intimate familiarity with every landmark, every turn in the coastline, every distinctive peak that could serve as a waypoint. He knew which cliffs caught the light in the morning and which headlands were visible in evening mist. This knowledge had been passed down from father to son, from master to apprentice, creating a network of shared wisdom that made safe passage possible even when fog or storm clouds obscured the sky. The evening light was beginning to fade now, painting the water in shades of deep blue and purple. Soon, if the conditions were right, he might witness one of nature's most magnificent displays. For now, though, he was content to let his ship drift gently forward, carried by currents that had flowed through these channels since the ice retreated and carved these deep valleys into the living rock. Chapter 1. The Gentle Waters. The fjord embraced Bjorn's ship like a mother cradling her child, its waters so calm they seemed almost solid, as if he could step out and walk across their surface to the distant shores. The gentle movement of his Nur created the only disturbance in this perfect mirror, sending out rings that spread slowly towards the cliffs and returned as whispers so soft they barely registered against the hull. Towering walls of stone rose on either side, their faces carved by ice and time into shapes that stirred the imagination. In some places, the rock showed bands of different colors, dark gray and lighter granite, traces of minerals that caught what remained of the daylight and reflected it back in subtle gleams. Waterfalls tumbled from heights so great they turned to mist before reaching the fjord, creating soft curtains of spray that caught the last rays of sun and transformed them into brief, dancing rainbows. Early winter mist clung to the upper reaches of the cliffs, moving slowly like the breath of sleeping giants. The mist softened the harsh edges of stone, creating a landscape that seemed to exist somewhere between the waking world and the realm of dreams. Sometimes it parted to reveal peaks that seemed to touch the sky itself, then closed again, keeping its secrets hidden until another day. Seals followed at a respectful distance, their dark heads appearing and disappearing with the patient curiosity that marked their kind. They seemed to understand that Bjorn's ship posed no threat, moving through their domain with the quiet respect of someone who knew he was a guest in their ancient home. Arctic terns. Those master travelers who had seen both ends of the world settled along the shoreline as evening approached, their white forms like scattered flowers against the dark rocks. The rhythm of the oars created a meditation in itself. Dip, pull, lift, return. Each stroke measured and purposeful, never hurried, never forced. The oars themselves were works of art, carved from ash wood that had been seasoned for years until it achieved the perfect balance of strength and flexibility. The blade of each oar was shaped to catch the water cleanly, without the splash or turbulence that would disturb the peaceful passage through these sacred waters. Navigation in the fjords required a completely different approach than the techniques used on the open ocean. Out there, Norse sailors relied on sun compasses, those ingenious devices of crystal and bronze that could find direction even when clouds obscured the sky. They read the patterns of swells that traveled vast distances across open water, interpreted the flight of birds and the color of distant clouds, used their deep knowledge of currents and seasonal winds to find their way across seemingly empty seas. But here, in these protected waterways, navigation became an intimate conversation with the land itself. Bjorn knew every distinctive rock formation, every waterfall that marked a particular turning in the channel, every beach where a ship could safely land if weather or darkness made further travel unwise. This knowledge had been accumulated over generations, passed down from father to son, from experienced captain to eager apprentice, creating a living map that existed not on parchment, but in the memories of those who made their living on these waters. The seasonal patterns of North Sea trade followed rhythms as old as human civilization in these lands. Spring brought the first tentative voyages as traders emerged from the long winter months, eager to resume the relationships and bargains that had been put aside when ice and storm made travel too dangerous. Summer was the great season of movement when ships from all the Norse lands converged on the major trading centers, their holds filled with goods that had been crafted or gathered during the quiet winter months. Autumn, like now, was the time of the final journeys, when traders hurried to complete their business before winter closed the sea roads once again. There was a particular satisfaction to these late-season voyages, the holds filled with the fruits of a successful trading season, the prospect of winter's rest approaching, the knowledge that another year's work was drawing to its peaceful close. The construction of ships like Bjorn's Nur represented the culmination of centuries of accumulated wisdom about how to build vessels that could handle the unique demands of northern waters. The clinker-built technique, where each plank overlapped its neighbor like scales on a fish, created a hull that was both flexible and strong. The ship could bend slightly with the waves rather than fighting them, a quality that had saved countless lives in the storms that could arise suddenly on these northern seas. Pine tar, boiled from the resin of trees that grew in the endless forests of Norway and Sweden, provided the waterproofing that kept these ships afloat season after season. The process of making pine tar was itself an ancient art, requiring careful timing and patient attention as the resin was slowly transformed into the black, aromatic substance that sealed every joint and protected every surface from the relentless action of salt water. The gentle sounds that surrounded Bjorn now created a natural symphony of peace. Water lapped against the hull with a rhythm as regular as breathing. Distant bird calls echoed from the cliffs, their voices softened by distance and mist. The ship itself contributed its own quiet music. The creak of ropes adjusting to subtle changes in load, the whisper of the hull moving through water, the soft sounds of wood settling into the evening's cooler temperatures. This was the music that had accompanied Norse traders for generations, a soundtrack of peace that made the long hours of travel pass like a pleasant dream. Bjorn had learned long ago to listen to these sounds, not just for their beauty, but for the information they carried. The way water moved past the hull told him about current and drift. The sound of the wind in the rigging warned of weather changes still hours away. The creak of the ship's timbers spoke of cargo properly balanced, and hull sound and true. As full darkness approached, the fjord took on an even more magical quality. The last light of day lingered on the water's surface, creating a pathway of silver that seemed to lead toward the edge of the world itself. Soon, if the conditions were right and the northern lights chose to dance, this peaceful waterway would become the stage for one of nature's most magnificent performances. Chapter 2: Memories of the Market Towns. As his ship drifted gently through the evening calm, Bjorn's mind wandered to the bustling market town of Kaupang, where he had spent the early weeks of autumn completing the trades that now filled his hold with such valuable cargo. Kaupang held the distinction of being Norway's first true trading center, a place where merchants from across the known world gathered to exchange not just goods, but stories and knowledge that connected distant lands in webs of commerce and friendship. The town was laid out with the careful order that marked all successful trading centers. Straight streets ran from the harbor inland, lined with workshops and stalls, where craftspeople plied their trades under the watchful eyes of potential customers. The harbor itself was a marvel of practical engineering, with wooden piers extending into deep water, where ships of all sizes could moor safely, protected from the worst weather by natural headlands that acted like guardian arms, embracing the entire settlement. In Kaupang, Bjorn had worked with the Amber Guild, one of those specialized groups of merchants who had turned the trading of a single precious substance into an art form that combined commerce with genuine expertise. The guild members could examine a piece of amber and tell you not just its value, but its history, which forests had produced the original trees, how long the resin had spent buried in coastal sands, whether the clarity and color would make it suitable for jewelry or better suited to the grinding that produced amber powder for medicines and perfumes. The process of sorting amber was itself a meditation in patience and attention to detail. Each piece had to be examined under the best possible light, turned slowly in experienced hands to reveal every inclusion, every variation in transparency, every subtle gradation of color. The most valuable pieces were those that combined perfect clarity with the deep golden color that seemed to hold sunshine itself. But even the cloudy, darker specimens had their place in the intricate hierarchy of value that governed the amber trade. Some pieces contained the perfectly preserved forms of ancient insects, creatures that had lived and died in primordial forests so long ago that their very existence seemed like messages from another world. These inclusion pieces commanded prices that reflected not just their rarity, but their power to inspire wonder in those who gazed into their golden depths and saw life preserved from ages beyond human memory. The amber trade routes stretched from the Baltic shores where the precious resin was gathered, through the trading centers of Scandinavia, and south along paths that eventually reached the Mediterranean markets, where amber was prized beyond gold. Each piece of amber in Bjorn's hold represented a link in this vast chain of commerce that connected the northern seas to lands where people worshipped different gods and spoke in tongues that would sound strange to Norse ears, yet shared the universal appreciation for beauty that made such trade possible. In the silversmith workshops of Kaupang, Bjorn had watched craftsmen work with the patient precision that marked their trade. Silver arrived in various forms, sometimes as bars marked with the names of distant mints, sometimes as coins from kingdoms, both familiar and exotic, sometimes as hehack silver, pieces cut from larger objects to provide exact weights for particular transactions. The smiths would melt this silver in crucibles heated by charcoal fires that burned with precisely controlled temperatures, then pour the molten metal into molds carved from stone or pressed from clay. Arm rings, the standard currency of the Norse world, required particular skill to produce. Each ring had to be not only beautiful, but perfectly weighted according to standards that were recognized from Dublin to Constantinople. The patterns that decorated these silver ornaments told stories of their own. Some bore the intricate knotwork that spoke of Celtic influence, designs that seemed to have no beginning or end, symbolizing the eternal cycles of seasons and generations. Others carried geometric patterns that reflected the clean, precise aesthetic, favored in the Eastern trading centers, where mathematics and art combined to create decorations of satisfying symmetry and balance. The woolen industry of the region represented another form of patient craftsmanship that had been refined over countless generations. The process began with sheep that grazed on hillsides where the harsh climate produced wool of exceptional quality, dense, water-resistant, and strong enough to withstand the rigors of northern weather while remaining soft enough for comfort against human skin. Preparing wool for weaving was itself a lengthy process that required careful attention at each stage. First came the sorting, as experienced hands separated the finest fibers from the coarser ones, each grade destined for different purposes. The finest wool would become cloth suitable for the garments of wealthy merchants and nobles, while coarser fibers would be woven into the heavy cloaks and blankets that protected working people from winter's bite. The dyeing process represented one of the most closely guarded secrets of the textile trade. The deep red color that commanded such high prices came from madder root, a plant that had to be cultivated with care and processed with techniques that had been refined through generations of patient experimentation. The roots were dried, ground, and then boiled with the wool in precise combinations that produced colors ranging from bright scarlet to deep burgundy, depending on the skill of the dyer and the particular conditions of each batch. Blue dye came from woad, a plant that grew in the southern regions and commanded prices that reflected both its rarity and the complex process required to extract its color. The leaves had to be harvested at exactly the right moment in their growth, then subjected to a fermentation process that was part art, part science, and entirely dependent on the experience and intuition of the dyer. The weaving itself took place on looms that were works of art in their own right, constructed from carefully selected woods and adjusted with the precision of musical instruments. The rhythm of the shuttle passing back and forth through the warp threads created a music that was one of the characteristic sounds of any prosperous community, a steady beat that spoke of productivity and the patient creation of wealth through skilled labor. Trade relationships in this world were built on something more substantial than simple commercial advantage. They required trust that could survive the months or even years between meetings, honesty that could withstand the temptations offered by valuable cargoes and uncertain enforcement of agreements, and a kind of personal integrity that became a merchant's most valuable asset. Bjorn had relationships with other traders that stretched back to his earliest days in the business, connections that had been forged through shared dangers and sealed by the kind of mutual dependence that arose naturally in a world where communication was slow and reliable. Partners were precious beyond measure. These relationships had survived storms and shipwrecks, political upheavals, and economic disruptions, because they were based on something deeper than mere profit. The concept of market peace was fundamental to the operation of trading centers throughout the Norse world. This was more than just an agreement to avoid violence during commercial transactions. It was a recognition that trade required a special kind of trust, a willingness to treat even strangers as potential partners rather than enemies or victims. Under market peace, all who came to trade were granted safe passage and fair treatment, regardless of their origins or the political relationships between their homelands. A merchant from Denmark could deal safely with a trader from Norway, even if their kings were at war, because the market existed in a space apart from the ordinary conflicts of kingdoms and families. This system worked because it served everyone's interests, but it also required a kind of collective commitment to ideals that transcended immediate advantage. The prosperity of trading centers like Kaupang depended on their reputation for fairness and safety, reputations that could be destroyed by a single act of treachery, but took generations of honest dealing to establish. As Bjorn's ship continued its peaceful passage through the evening calm, he found deep satisfaction in knowing that his cargo represented not just his own year's work, but his place in this vast network of relationships that connected craftspeople and customers across distances that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Each piece of amber, each silver ring, each length of carefully dyed wool carried with it the story of human cooperation and shared purpose that made civilization possible. Chapter 3: The Aurora Awakens. The first hint of the coming display appeared as little more than a suggestion of light on the northern horizon, so subtle that at first Bjorn wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him in the gathering darkness. It was nothing more than a faint luminous quality to the sky, as if clouds were reflecting the light of a distant fire. Yet there were no clouds, and certainly no fires large enough to cast such a glow. Gradually, the light strengthened and took on a distinctly green tinge, the color of spring grass or deep forest shadows, but somehow more ethereal, more alive than any earthly green Bjorn had ever seen. The glow began to define itself against the star-filled sky, forming a gentle arch that stretched from one horizon to another, like a bridge built from light itself. Bjorn had witnessed the northern lights countless times during his years of trading in these waters, yet each display brought the same sense of wonder that had filled him as a child when his grandmother first pointed out the dancing lights and told him the stories that explained their presence in the night sky. No amount of familiarity could diminish the awe that came from watching the sky itself come alive with colors that seemed too beautiful to belong to the ordinary world. The aurora's reflection in the still water of the fjord created a double image that was almost more magical than the lights themselves. The perfect mirror of the water's surface captured every subtle shift in color and intensity, so that Bjorn felt surrounded by light, as if his ship floated not on water but through the aurora itself. The reflection was so clear and detailed that it became difficult to tell where the real lights ended and their mirror image began. His Nur continued its gentle glide through the calm water, its movement so smooth and quiet that it seemed to float on air rather than sea. The ship's wake created gentle ripples that disturbed the reflected lights, sending fragments of green luminescence dancing across the water's surface before the disturbed area smoothed again, and the reflection returned to its perfect clarity. In Norse tradition, the aurora borealis was known as the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected Midgard, the world of humans, with Asgard, the realm of the gods. This bridge was said to be guarded by Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, who could see across all the 9 worlds and hear grass growing in the meadows and wool growing on sheep. The lights that danced across the northern sky were thought to be reflections from this cosmic bridge, glimpses of the pathway that heroes would one day travel to reach the great hall of Valhalla. Another explanation, equally beautiful in its imagery, held that the aurora was created by the Valkyries, the warrior maidens who rode across battlefields to choose which fallen heroes would be taken to Valhalla. According to this belief, the lights were reflections from their armor and spear points as they rode their great horses across the sky, their weapons gleaming with an otherworldly radiance that painted the heavens in shifting curtains of color. These mythological explanations served a purpose that went far beyond mere storytelling. In a world where scientific understanding was limited and natural phenomena could seem frightening in their power and unpredictability, such stories provided frameworks for understanding and accepting the wonders that surrounded daily life. They transformed the potentially terrifying sight of the sky itself, appearing to catch fire into a manifestation of divine presence and cosmic order. For navigators like Bjorn, the aurora served practical purposes as well as inspiring wonder. The lights always appeared in the northern sky, providing a reliable indication of direction that could be invaluable when clouds obscured the stars or when travel in unfamiliar waters made traditional landmarks unavailable. The intensity and frequency of auroral displays also followed patterns that experienced mariners learned to read as indicators of weather patterns and seasonal changes. The relationship between solar activity and aurora visibility was not understood in scientific terms during Bjorn's time, but generations of observation had revealed practical correlations that served the needs of those who lived and worked under northern skies. Particularly intense displays often preceded periods of unsettled weather, while the complete absence of aurora during seasons when they were normally visible could signal unusual atmospheric conditions that might affect wind patterns and storm development. Traditional Norse timekeeping was intimately connected with the observation of celestial phenomena, including the aurora. The changing patterns of auroral activity throughout the year provided one of many natural calendars that helped people track the passage of seasons and plan activities accordingly. Combined with careful observation of the sun's path, the phases of the moon, and the positions of key stars and constellations, aurora watching was part of a sophisticated system of temporal awareness that governed everything from agricultural activities to religious observances. The seasonal awareness that came from close attention to natural phenomena was essential for survival and prosperity in the harsh northern climate. Understanding when to plant and when to harvest, when to begin preparations for winter, and when it was safe to resume sea travel in spring, when to gather particular plants for medicine or dyeing, and when certain animals could be hunted. All of this knowledge depended on the ability to read the subtle signs that nature provided to those who knew how to observe. The aurora now began to intensify, the gentle arch of green light starting to develop more complex structures. Vertical columns of luminescence appeared, stretching from the horizon toward the zenith, while the horizontal bands began to undulate with a slow, hypnotic rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. The lights pulsed with a life of their own, growing brighter and dimmer in cycles that created a sense of vast, slow heartbeat in the sky itself. As Bjorn watched, completely absorbed in the beauty of the display, he felt the kind of deep peace that came from witnessing something that connected him to all the generations of his people who had sailed these same waters under these same dancing lights. The aurora was a reminder that some things transcended the immediate concerns of trade and travel, profit and loss, the small daily struggles that occupied so much human attention. This was beauty for its own sake, a gift from whatever forces governed the cosmos, offered freely to anyone with the wisdom to pause in their busy lives and simply watch. The lights asked nothing and promised nothing beyond their own magnificent presence. Yet in that presence was a kind of teaching about the proper relationship between human ambition and the vast mysteries that surrounded all mortal endeavors. The water continued to mirror the sky with perfect fidelity, creating a world where Bjorn's ship seemed suspended between two aurora displays, sailing through a universe made entirely of light. The gentle motion of the ship through the calm water sent small waves spreading outward, and where these waves disturbed the reflection, the mirrored lights broke apart into thousands of individual sparkles, like scattered gems dancing on the surface of the fjord. Chapter 4. The Dance of Lights. The aurora began to reveal its full, magnificent complexity as the night deepened around Bjorn's quietly drifting ship. What had started as a simple arch of green light now blossomed into a spectacular display that transformed the entire northern sky into a canvas of living color and movement. The green deepened and brightened, taking on the rich hue of sunlight filtered through the deepest forest, while ribbons of blue began to appear, threading through the green like streams of liquid sapphire flowing across the heavens. The movement of the lights followed patterns that seemed almost choreographed, as if invisible dancers were performing an ancient ritual in the sky above. Curtains of luminescence swayed back and forth with a rhythm as regular as breathing, while vertical columns pulsed with waves of intensity that traveled from the horizon toward the zenith, like slow lightning frozen in the moment of its birth. Most remarkable of all, hints of red began to appear at the very top of the display, a color so rare in the aurora that many people lived their entire lives without witnessing it. The red was deep and rich, like the glow of embers in a forge or the color of wine held up to lamplight. It appeared in brief flashes at first, then gradually strengthened and spread, adding a crown of crimson glory to the green and blue foundation of the display. The reflection in the fjord's mirror-smooth surface created a world of impossible beauty, where every subtle shift in the aurora above was perfectly duplicated in the water below. Bjorn's ship seemed to float in a sphere of pure light, surrounded above and below by the same magnificent dance of color and movement. When gentle ripples from the ship's passage disturbed the perfect reflection, fragments of aurora light scattered across the water's surface like handfuls of scattered jewels, green and blue and red sparkles that danced briefly before the water smoothed and the perfect mirror returned. The hypnotic quality of the aurora's movement created a kind of meditation that seemed to slow time itself. Bjorn found himself breathing in rhythm with the pulsing lights, his heartbeat synchronizing with the slow waves of brightness that flowed across the sky. The ordinary concerns of trade and navigation, the calculations of profit, and the planning of future journeys all faded into insignificance before this reminder of the cosmic forces that dwarfed human ambition and put worldly concerns into their proper perspective. In Norse mythology, such displays were sometimes interpreted as glimpses of the ongoing struggle between order and chaos that would culminate in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. The lights were seen as reflections of the shields and spears of the Einherjar, the chosen slain, who spent their days in Valhalla preparing for the final battle. This interpretation gave the aurora a meaning that went far beyond simple beauty, connecting the lights to the deepest questions about fate, heroism, and the ultimate destiny of both gods and humans. Another mythological understanding saw the aurora as manifestations of the wild hunt, led by Odin himself, as he rode his eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, across the night sky. The lights were the gleaming of weapons and armor, as the ghostly hunters pursued their eternal quarry through the heavens, a reminder that the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was thinner than most people imagined. These mythological frameworks provided ways of thinking about natural phenomena that went beyond mere explanation to offer meaning and connection to larger cosmic patterns. They transformed the aurora from a mysterious and potentially frightening display of unknown forces into a manifestation of familiar stories and relationships, making the vast and incomprehensible more accessible to human understanding. The practical importance of understanding weather and natural signs for traders like Bjorn could not be overstated. Success in maritime commerce depended on the ability to read the subtle signs that warned of coming storms, indicated favorable winds, or suggested when it might be safe to attempt a particularly challenging passage. The aurora was one element in a complex system of natural indicators that experienced mariners learned to interpret as carefully as any written text. Particularly intense aurora displays were often followed by periods of disturbed weather, as the same solar activity that created the lights also influenced atmospheric patterns in ways that could affect wind direction and strength. While the mechanisms behind these connections would not be understood scientifically for many centuries, the correlations had been observed and noted by generations of sailors who learned to use every available source of information in their constant struggle to work safely in harmony with natural forces. The aurora also provided information about seasonal progression and long-term climate patterns. The frequency and intensity of displays varied not just with the solar cycle, but also with atmospheric conditions that reflected larger patterns of weather and climate. Experienced observers could use aurora activity as one factor in predicting whether a coming winter would be particularly harsh or whether spring might arrive earlier or later than usual. Traditional Norse concepts of time were cyclical rather than linear, emphasizing the eternal return of seasons and the repetition of cosmic patterns rather than progression towards some final destination. The aurora embodied this cyclical understanding, returning year after year with variations in intensity and frequency, but always maintaining its essential character as a bridge between the human world and the realm of forces that operated on scales too vast for mortal comprehension. The current display seemed to grow more intense with each passing moment, as if the lights were responding to some cosmic rhythm that was building toward a crescendo. The green curtains began to move faster, rippling like fabric in a strong wind, while the blue threads wove increasingly complex patterns through the basic structure. The red crown at the top of the display strengthened and spread, creating a canopy of color that seemed to arch over the entire fjord like a tent made of light. Bjorn found himself thinking of all the other nights he had spent on these waters, all the other aurora displays he had witnessed, and how each one had been unique while partaking of the same fundamental beauty. This continuity connected him not just to his own past experiences, but to all the countless other people who had watched these same lights dancing in northern skies throughout history. The aurora was a reminder of the vastness of time and space that surrounded human life. Yet it was also somehow intimate and personal, as if the lights were performing specifically for whatever audience happened to be watching. This paradox of cosmic scale combined with personal meaning was part of what made the aurora such a powerful spiritual experience for those who took the time to truly observe its magnificence. The movements of the lights seemed almost like a language, a form of communication from forces that operated according to laws and purposes beyond human understanding. While the specific meaning of this celestial language would forever remain mysterious, the act of witnessing it created a kind of communion that transcended the need for rational comprehension. As the display reached new heights of intensity and complexity, Bjorn felt the deep satisfaction that came from being present for one of nature's greatest performances. The aurora asked nothing from its audience except attention and appreciation. Yet in return, it offered experiences of beauty so profound they could provide spiritual nourishment for years to come. The gentle motion of his ship continued to create small disturbances in the perfect reflection, sending ripples across the mirrored lights that transformed them into thousands of individual sparkles. These scattered fragments of aurora light danced briefly on the water's surface before the ripples smoothed and the perfect mirror returned, only to be disturbed again by the next gentle wave from the ship's passage. This interplay between the eternal dance of the lights and the small temporary disturbances created by human presence seemed to symbolize the relationship between cosmic forces and mortal life. The aurora would continue its magnificent display, regardless of whether anyone was there to witness it. Yet the presence of observers added something meaningful to the experience, creating moments of connection between the vast and the intimate, the eternal and the temporal. Chapter 5: Ancient Stories. As the aurora reached the peak of its magnificent display, painting the entire northern sky in shifting curtains of green, blue, and red, Bjorn found his mind turning to the ancient stories his grandmother had told him during the long winter nights of his childhood. These were not just entertaining tales to pass the time. but sacred narratives that carried the accumulated wisdom of his people about the nature of the world and humanity's place within the vast cosmos. The most beautiful of these stories was the tale of Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected the 9 worlds of Norse cosmology. According to the ancient wisdom, this bridge was built from fire, water, and air, its colors more vivid than any earthly rainbow, because it was constructed from the fundamental forces that shaped all existence. The aurora that now danced above Bjorn's ship was said to be a reflection of this cosmic bridge, glimpses of the pathway that connected the realm of humans to the dwelling places of gods and heroes. Heimdall, the guardian of Bifrost, was described as the whitest of the gods, with golden teeth and eyes that could see for hundreds of miles in any direction. His hearing was so acute that he could hear grass crowing in distant meadows and wool crowing on the backs of sheep in far-off pastures. From his post at the bridge's entrance, he watched for signs of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when the forces of chaos would finally break free from their bonds and bring about the end of the current world order. The story of Bifrost connected the aurora to themes of transition and transformation that resonated deeply with the Norse understanding of existence as a series of cycles, each ending leading to a new beginning. The bridge itself was not permanent, but would eventually be destroyed in the final battle. Yet its destruction would be followed by the emergence of a new world, green and fertile, where the surviving gods would build a better order from the ruins of the old. Another beloved story told of the Valkyries, the choosers of the slain, who rode their great horses across battlefields to select which warriors would be taken to Valhalla. These warrior maidens were described as beings of extraordinary beauty and power, their armor gleaming with divine light, their spears crackling with otherworldly energy. When they rode across the night sky, the light from their weapons and armor created the aurora, painting the heavens with reflections of their supernatural radiance. The Valkyries represented the Norse understanding of death as a transition rather than an ending, particularly for those who died bravely in battle. To be chosen by a Valkyrie was the highest honor a warrior could achieve, a recognition that one's courage and skill had earned a place among the Einherjar, the elite warriors who would fight alongside the gods in the final battle against the forces of chaos. These stories served multiple purposes in Norse culture beyond simple entertainment. They provided explanations for natural phenomena that might otherwise seem frightening or incomprehensible, transforming the aurora from a mysterious display of unknown forces into a manifestation of familiar divine activities. They also carried moral and philosophical teachings about courage, honor, and the proper relationship between humans and the supernatural forces that governed their world. Bjorn's grandmother had been a master storyteller, one of those keepers of oral tradition who carried the cultural memory of her people in the vast repository of tales, songs, and genealogies that lived in her memory. She had learned these stories from her own grandmother, who had received them from the generation before, creating an unbroken chain of transmission that stretched back to the very origins of Norse civilization. The oral tradition was the primary means by which cultural knowledge was preserved and transmitted in Norse society. While runic writing existed and was used for certain purposes, the vast majority of important information, historical events, religious beliefs, practical knowledge, legal precedents, and artistic expressions was maintained in human memory and passed down through spoken word. This system of oral transmission created a living tradition that could adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character. Each storyteller brought their own interpretation and emphasis to the ancient tales, while the basic structure and meaning remained constant. The stories grew richer and more complex over time, accumulating layers of meaning and detail that reflected the experiences and insights of countless generations. The role of skalds, the poet storytellers, who were among the most honored members of Norse society, was crucial to this system of cultural preservation. These skilled artists were not merely entertainers, but served as living libraries, repositories of knowledge, who could recite genealogies stretching back for centuries, recount the deeds of legendary heroes, and compose new verses that would add to the growing body of Norse literature. Skalds were expected to master incredibly complex poetic forms that used intricate patterns of rhyme, rhythm, and alliteration to create verses that were both beautiful and memorable. The demanding technical requirements of these poetic forms served a practical purpose, making the verses easier to memorize accurately and providing built-in checks against errors in transmission. The stories of the aurora were woven into this larger tapestry of Norse cosmology, which described a universe consisting of 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree. This great ash tree stood at the center of all existence, its roots extending deep into the underworld, while its branches reached high into the heavens. The aurora was understood as one of many manifestations of the cosmic forces that flowed through this great tree, connecting all the worlds in a web of relationships and influences. At the roots of Yggdrasil lived the Norns, the 3 sisters who controlled fate and destiny. Urd represented the past, Verdandi the present, and Skuld the future. These powerful beings wove the threads of fate that determined the course of both individual lives and cosmic events. The aurora was sometimes interpreted as a reflection of their weaving, the lights representing the threads of destiny as they were woven into the great pattern that encompassed all existence. The concept of word, often translated as fate, but carrying meanings much richer and more complex than simple predestination, was central to Norse understanding of how individual choice interacted with cosmic forces. Wyatt suggested that while certain broad patterns were fixed, there was still room for human agency and decision-making within those patterns. The aurora, with its combination of predictable seasonal occurrence and unpredictable nightly variation, seemed to embody this complex relationship between destiny and choice. Personal stories also became part of Bjorn's memories of aurora displays. His grandmother had told him about the night he was born, when an aurora of unusual intensity had filled the sky with colors so bright they could be seen even through the small windows of their winter dwelling. She had interpreted this as a sign that he would be a traveler, someone whose life would be spent moving between different worlds and cultures, connecting distant places through the ancient art of trade. That prophecy had certainly proven accurate, as Bjorn's career had taken him to trading centers throughout the Norse world and brought him into contact with people from cultures as distant as Byzantium and the Arab lands. Each journey had added to his understanding of how the Northern Lights were perceived and interpreted by different peoples, creating a rich tapestry of beliefs and stories that all shared certain common elements. The continuity represented by these aurora stories connected Bjorn not just to his own family history, but to the broader cultural heritage of his people. The same lights that now danced above his ship had inspired wonder and storytelling for countless generations, creating a bridge across time that was as real and meaningful as the mythical Bifrost that connected the different worlds of Norse cosmology. The stories also served as a form of navigation aid, providing frameworks for understanding and remembering the subtle variations in aurora activity that could provide information about weather patterns, seasonal progression, and other practical matters important to those who lived and worked in the northern regions. The mythological language made these practical observations easier to remember and transmit, embedding useful knowledge within compelling narratives. As Bjorn watched the current display, he could almost hear his grandmother's voice telling him about the great horse Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged steed, whose hoofbeats across the sky created the rhythmic pulsing that characterized many aurora displays. The horse was said to be the fastest of all creatures, capable of carrying its rider between the worlds of the living and the dead, across the vast distances that separated the different realms of existence. The image of Sleipnir galloping across the night sky, with Odin as the wild huntsman leading the ghostly procession of the dead, provided a powerful metaphor for the aurora's movement and gave meaning to its appearance during the dark months of winter, when the boundary between life and death seemed thinnest. These were the months when the ancestors were closest to the world of the living, when their wisdom and protection were most needed by those who struggled through the challenges of the harsh season. The mythology surrounding the aurora also included stories of more benevolent supernatural beings. The light elves, beautiful creatures who lived in Alfheim, one of the 9 worlds, were sometimes said to be responsible for the gentler displays that appeared as soft glows rather than dramatic dancing curtains. These beings were associated with fertility, prosperity, and the return of light after the darkness of winter. The connection between aurora stories and seasonal cycles reflected the deep integration of Norse religion and mythology with the practical realities of life in northern climates. The stories provided not just entertainment and spiritual meaning, but also served as mnemonic devices for remembering important information about the progression of seasons and the signs that indicated changes in weather patterns. As the current aurora display began to show signs of gradually diminishing intensity, Bjorn reflected on how these ancient stories continue to enrich his experience of natural phenomena. While he had gained practical knowledge about navigation and weather prediction through years of experience, the mythological framework provided by his cultural heritage added layers of meaning and connection that transformed simple observation into something approaching spiritual communion. The stories reminded him that he was not just an individual observer of a natural phenomenon, but part of a long chain of witnesses that stretched back through countless generations. Each person who had ever watched the northern lights dance across Arctic skies had contributed to the growing understanding of these magnificent displays, adding their own observations and interpretations to the collective wisdom of their people. Chapter 6. The Trader's Wisdom. As the aurora continued its magnificent dance above his gently drifting ship, Bjorn found himself reflecting on the lessons that a lifetime of trading had taught him. Wisdom that extended far beyond the simple mechanics of buying and selling to encompass fundamental truths about human nature, and the proper way to live in harmony with both the natural world and the complex web of relationships that made civilization possible. Patience, perhaps more than any other quality, had proven essential to success in the trading life. The aurora itself embodied this virtue, appearing according to its own mysterious schedule, never to be hurried or forced, offering its beauty only to those willing to wait and watch with quiet attention. Similarly, the most profitable trades often required months or even years of careful preparation, relationship building, and patient waiting for the right moment when all the necessary conditions finally aligned. Bjorn had learned early in his career that rushing into transactions usually led to poor results. The best deals emerged naturally from long-term relationships built on mutual trust and understanding. A merchant who tried to extract maximum profit from every exchange might succeed in the short term, but would gradually find himself excluded from the networks of trust that made truly significant trading opportunities possible. The concept of trust formed the foundation of all successful commercial relationships in the Norse trading world. Without modern systems of law enforcement or financial institutions to guarantee agreements, commerce depended entirely on the personal integrity of the individuals involved. A trader's reputation for honesty and fair dealing was literally his most valuable asset, more precious than any cargo he might carry. This trust had to be earned through consistent behavior over many years and could be destroyed by a single act of dishonesty or treachery. Bjorn had seen traders who tried to cheat their partners discover that word of their betrayal spread quickly through the tightly connected networks of Norse commerce, leaving them unable to find anyone willing to do business with them. The patience required for trust building extended to every aspect of the trading life. Establishing relationships with craftspeople who produced the goods that filled a trader's hold required time to understand their work rhythms, their standards of quality, and their personal needs and preferences. The best artisans were often the most particular about whom they would work with, preferring to deal with traders who appreciated the time and skill that went into creating truly excellent products. Observation formed another crucial component of trading wisdom. Success required the ability to read not just markets and prices, but people, weather, and the subtle signs that indicated changes in political and economic conditions. Bjorn had learned to notice the small details that others might miss. The way a merchant's eyes shifted when discussing a particular deal, the quality of light that preceded a change in weather, the tension in voices that suggested political troubles brewing in distant kingdoms. This skill of observation extended to understanding the deeper currents that moved beneath the surface of events. The most successful traders were those who could anticipate changes before they became obvious to everyone else, positioning themselves to take advantage of new opportunities or avoid emerging dangers. This required not just attention to immediate circumstances, but an understanding of the larger patterns that governed human behavior and natural cycles. Reading weather was a literal matter of life and death for those who made their living on northern waters. Bjorn had learned to interpret the subtle signs that appeared hours or even days before major weather changes. The particular quality of light on distant clouds, the behavior of seabirds, the feel of the wind, and the look of the water's surface. The aurora itself often provided clues about atmospheric conditions that could affect weather patterns in the days to come. Reading people required equally refined skills of observation and interpretation. The most important negotiations often turned on the ability to understand what a potential partner really wanted, beyond what they explicitly stated. This understanding came from paying attention to tone of voice, body language, and the small inconsistencies that revealed unstated concerns or hidden motivations. The balance between work and rest represented another form of wisdom that Bjorn had acquired through experience. The trading life involved periods of intense activity, alternating with times of enforced patience when weather, season, or circumstances made travel impossible. Learning to use both types of periods effectively was essential for long-term success and personal well-being. During the busy seasons of spring and summer, when favorable weather made long-distance travel possible, and trading centers came alive with merchants from across the known world, successful traders worked with focused intensity, taking advantage of every opportunity to complete profitable exchanges. These were times when decisions had to be made quickly and when the ability to work long hours without losing judgment or attention to detail could mean the difference between success and failure. But the winter months, when storm and ice made sea travel too dangerous for all but the most desperate or foolish, provided equally important opportunities for different kinds of work. This was when relationships were maintained and deepened through the sharing of stories and hospitality, when new products were planned and commissioned from skilled artisans, when the accumulated experiences of the trading season were reflected upon and transformed into wisdom for future application. The rhythm of adventure and home, of journeying and returning, created a natural balance that kept the trading life from becoming merely a restless pursuit of profit. The joy of discovering new places and meeting new people was balanced by the deep satisfaction of returning to familiar surroundings and reconnecting with family and community. Neither alone would have been sufficient. Together, they created a way of life that was both stimulating and sustainable. The Norse concept of honor provided the ethical framework within which all successful trading relationships operated. Honor was not simply a matter of following rules or avoiding explicitly dishonest behavior, but required a positive commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their social status or economic position. This concept of honor extended to relationships with competitors as well as partners. The most respected traders were those who could compete vigorously for profitable opportunities while maintaining cordial relationships with their rivals. The Norse trading world was small enough that today's competitor might be tomorrow's partner, and treating others with respect, even in the heat of competition, was both ethically required and practically beneficial. Reputation in the Norse world was not just an individual matter, but extended to families and entire communities. A trader's behavior reflected not just on himself, but on his kinship group and his place of origin. This collective responsibility created powerful incentives for ethical behavior, since dishonor could affect not just the individual, but everyone connected to him. The maintenance of trading relationships across vast distances required sophisticated systems of communication and coordination that operated without modern technology. Bjorn relied on networks of trust that allowed messages and goods to be passed from hand to hand across hundreds of miles, with each link in the chain taking responsibility for accurate transmission and safe delivery. These networks operated according to principles of reciprocity that extended far beyond simple commercial exchange. Traders were expected to carry news and messages for others, to provide assistance to fellow merchants in distress, and to maintain the shared infrastructure of markets and trading posts that made long-distance commerce possible. The integration of commerce and daily life in Norse society meant that trading was not seen as a separate activity, but as part of the larger web of relationships that held communities together. Successful traders were expected to be good citizens, contributing to the welfare of their home communities and supporting the cultural and religious institutions that maintained social cohesion. Seasonal patterns governed not just the practical aspects of trading, but also its social and spiritual dimensions. The great trading seasons coincided with religious festivals and cultural celebrations that reinforced the bonds between communities and provided occasions for the exchange of gifts and hospitality that complemented commercial transactions. The wisdom that came from years of successful trading was not just practical knowledge, but included deeper insights into human nature and the forces that governed both individual behavior and large-scale social patterns. This wisdom was highly valued in Norse society, and experienced traders were often consulted on matters that went far beyond commerce, their judgment sought on questions of law, politics, and community welfare. As Bjorn watched the aurora slowly begin to fade from its peak intensity, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from a life well lived according to principles that had proven their worth through practical application. The northern lights dancing above his ship were a reminder that some things in the world operated according to patterns and purposes larger than human understanding. Yet there was still room within those vast patterns for individual choice and effort to make a meaningful difference. Chapter 7. The Gentle Return. As the aurora gradually began to diminish in intensity, its brilliant curtains of green, blue, and red slowly fading to softer glows that blended more gently with the star-filled sky, Bjorn's ship continued its peaceful passage through the mirror-smooth waters of the fjord. The lights still danced, but with less dramatic movement, like a grand performance settling into its final, more contemplative movements before the curtain falls. The familiar landmarks that marked the approach to his home waters began to appear in the dim light, reflected from the aurora's gentle glow. There, on the port side, was the distinctive cliff formation that looked like a sleeping giant, its profile unmistakable even in the subdued light of the northern night. Ahead, the fjord began to widen slightly, indicating that he was approaching the broader waters, where his home harbor lay nestled in a protective bay. Recognition of these landmarks brought a quiet excitement that was different from the thrill of discovering new places or the satisfaction of completing a profitable transaction. This was the deep contentment that came from returning to familiar surroundings after a successful journey, the anticipation of sharing stories and experiences with people who understood the challenges and rewards of the trading life. His cargo hold, filled with the fruits of a season's careful work, represented more than just commercial success. Each item had its own story and destination. The amber would find its way to craftspeople who would transform the raw pieces into jewelry and ornaments that would carry the golden light of northern seas to distant lands. Some would be ground into powder for medicines and perfumes, bringing the ancient essence of primordial forests to heal and beautify in ways that connected past and present. The silver arm rings would enter the complex networks of exchange that served as both currency and ornamentation throughout the Norse world. Some would be melted down and reformed into new shapes, while others would pass from hand to hand for years, accumulating their own histories as they facilitated countless transactions between people who might never meet but were connected through the silver's journey. The carefully dyed woolen cloth would become garments that would protect their wearers from winter's bite while expressing their prosperity and taste through the rich colors that spoke of distant madder fields and woad gardens. The deep reds and blues would brighten the long dark months of winter, bringing warmth and beauty to homes throughout the region. The walrus ivory combs represented the most exotic element of his cargo, carrying with them something of the vast icy waters where the great tusked beasts hauled themselves onto floating ice under the endless daylight of the Arctic summer. These combs would become treasured possessions, passed down through families as heirlooms that carried stories of distant adventures and the brave men who ventured to the edge of the world to bring back its treasures. But beyond their immediate practical value, these goods represented Bjorn's participation in the vast network of relationships that connected communities across enormous distances. Each transaction had reinforced bonds of trust and friendship that made future commerce possible, while establishing his reputation as a reliable partner who could be counted on to deliver quality goods and honest dealing. The structure of Norse households that awaited his return was built around extended family relationships that provided security and support for individuals while creating larger units capable of undertaking ambitious projects like long-distance trading voyages. Bjorn's success would be shared with his entire kinship group, just as they had shared the risks and provided the initial investment that made his trading career possible. The integration of commerce and daily life meant that his return would be an event that affected not just his immediate family, but the entire community. The goods he brought would be distributed through networks of obligation and opportunity that connected every household in the region. The stories he carried would add to the community's knowledge of distant places and events, while the silver he had earned would contribute to the collective wealth that funded everything from religious festivals to community defense. Seasonal homecoming traditions had evolved to mark the transition from the active trading season to the quieter months of winter preparation and family life. These traditions served both practical and spiritual purposes, providing occasions for the distribution of goods and profits, while reinforcing the social bonds that held communities together through the challenging winter months. The anticipation of reuniting with family carried a quality of emotion that was different from any of the satisfactions of the trading life. While discovering new places and meeting new people provided excitement and stimulation, the prospect of returning to familiar faces and well-known surroundings offered a deeper form of contentment that touched something fundamental in human nature. Bjorn thought of his wife, who managed their household with the same skill and attention to detail that he brought to his trading ventures. Her work during his absence, supervising the harvest from their small farm, maintaining relationships with neighbors and kinsmen, overseeing the production of goods that would be ready for next season's trading, was as essential to their success as his travels to distant markets. His children, now old enough to understand something of the trading life, and perhaps beginning to dream of their own adventures, would be eager to hear stories of the places he had visited and the people he had met. Through these stories, they would begin to develop their own understanding of the larger world beyond their immediate community, perhaps feeling the first stirrings of the restless curiosity that might one day lead them to follow similar paths. The household economics of the Norse world required careful coordination between the activities of those who traveled and those who remained home. Success depended not just on the skills of individual traders, but on the ability of entire family units to work together toward common goals, each member contributing their particular talents and efforts to the collective enterprise. The seasonal patterns of medieval life created natural rhythms that governed everything from agricultural activities to religious observances. Bjorn's return marked not just the end of his individual trading season, but part of the larger community rhythm as people throughout the region completed their various summer activities and began the preparations that would carry them through the winter months. The integration of individual success with community welfare was a fundamental principle of Norse society. While personal achievement was recognized and rewarded, it was always understood within the context of obligation to family and community. Bjorn's success brought benefits not just to himself, but to everyone connected to him through the complex networks of kinship and reciprocity that held society together. As his ship drew closer to home waters, Bjorn could feel the shift in his own perspective as the role of traveler and explorer gradually gave way to that of community member and family head. This transition was as much a part of the trading life as the excitement of departure or the challenges of navigation and negotiation in distant markets. The familiar outline of his home harbor began to emerge from the gentle darkness, marked by the warm glow of oil lamps in windows that spoke of families gathered around their hearth fires, perhaps sharing their own stories or working on the crafts that would occupy the winter months. Soon he would be part of that peaceful domestic scene, his own year's adventures becoming memories to be shared and eventually transformed into the kind of stories that would be passed down to future generations. The aurora continued to provide a gentle backdrop to his homecoming, its softer glow now seeming less like a dramatic performance and more like a blessing on his safe return. The lights had witnessed his departure months ago and now watched over his arrival, providing a sense of continuity that connected the beginning and end of his journey in a circle that felt both complete and ready to begin again. Chapter 8. Dawn and Dreams. The first pale hints of dawn began to touch the eastern sky as Bjorn's ship made its final approach to the familiar harbor that marked the end of his season's trading journey. The aurora, which had provided such magnificent entertainment throughout the night, began to fade gradually as the natural light of approaching day slowly reclaimed the sky. The transition was so gentle that it seemed less like the ending of one phenomenon and the beginning of another than like a graceful passing of responsibility from the supernatural lights to the eternal rhythm of sun and season. The water of the harbor was even calmer than the fjord waters through which he had been traveling, protected by natural breakwaters and the careful positioning of wooden piers that his grandfather's generation had built to provide safe mooring for the trading vessels that were the lifeblood of the community. The surface was so still that it captured not only the fading aurora, but also the first golden reflections of the rising sun, creating a tapestry of light that seemed to bridge the magical and the mundane. Bjorn felt the deep satisfaction that came from completing a difficult task well done, the quiet pride that needed no external validation, because it was based on his own knowledge of the challenges overcome and the standards maintained throughout months of careful work. His cargo was secure, his ship was sound, and his reputation remained untarnished by any compromise of the principles that governed honest trade. This satisfaction was different from the excitement of profit or the thrill of adventure. It was more fundamental, touching something in his nature that responded to the completion of meaningful work undertaken according to ethical principles and carried through despite the inevitable obstacles and temptations that marked any significant endeavor. The approaching dawn revealed details of the harbor that had been hidden in the darkness. The familiar shapes of other vessels that had returned from their own trading journeys. The workshops and warehouses that lined the waterfront. The homes that climbed the hillsides beyond the commercial district. Each sight reinforced the sense of homecoming and the anticipation of resuming his place in the community that was both the source and the destination of his trading ventures. The cyclical nature of medieval trade was embodied in this moment of return, which was simultaneously an ending and a beginning. The season's work was complete, but the profits and relationships established during these months would provide the foundation for next year's ventures. The goods in his hold would be distributed, but the knowledge and connections gained during his travels would remain to guide future decisions. This cycle connected individual traders like Bjorn to patterns that were much larger than any single person's career or even lifetime. The same routes he had followed had been traveled by his father and grandfather, and would likely be traveled by his sons and grandsons. Each generation added its own contributions to the accumulated knowledge and relationships that made such commerce possible, while benefiting from the wisdom and reputation established by those who had gone before. The lasting impact of Norse trading networks extended far beyond their immediate economic effects to influence the cultural and technological development of medieval Europe. The connections established by traders like Bjorn facilitated not just the exchange of goods, but the transmission of ideas, techniques, and innovations that accelerated progress throughout the region. Individual traders served as more than just commercial agents. They were also cultural ambassadors who carried news, stories, and knowledge between communities that might otherwise have remained isolated. Their travels created a web of communication that allowed innovations to spread rapidly and helped communities learn from each other's experiences. The timeless human connection to natural beauty that Bjorn had experienced while watching the aurora represented something that transcended the practical concerns of trade and commerce. These moments of wonder and appreciation served as reminders that life's deepest satisfactions often came from experiences that had no monetary value, but enriched the spirit in ways that made all other activities more meaningful. The aurora had provided such an experience, a gift that asked nothing in return except attention and appreciation, yet offered rewards that would remain in memory long after the details of specific transactions had faded. This balance between practical work and aesthetic experience was part of what made the trading life sustainable over many years, without becoming merely a mechanical pursuit of profit. As the sun climbed higher and the last traces of aurora finally disappeared into the brightening sky, Bjorn prepared to dock his ship and begin the process of unloading his cargo. The physical work of moving goods from ship to warehouse would mark the transition from the contemplative calm of the night journey to the busier activities of shore-based commerce. But even as he turned his attention to these practical matters, part of his mind remained occupied with the memory of the night's magnificent display. The aurora had reminded him of the larger cosmic context within which all human activities took place, the vast forces and mysterious patterns that governed existence on scales too large for complete comprehension. This perspective would remain with him as he resumed his place in the daily life of his community, providing a sense of proportion that helped distinguish between genuine importance and mere urgency. The memory of the dancing lights would serve as a resource he could draw upon during the inevitable challenges and frustrations of the coming months, a reminder that beauty and wonder were always available to those who knew how to look for them. The peaceful rest that follows meaningful work was perhaps one of life's greatest pleasures, different from the exhaustion that came from pointless activity or the restlessness that resulted from work done poorly or dishonestly. Bjorn anticipated the deep sleep that would come after his cargo was safely unloaded and secured, the profound relaxation that was possible only when all responsibilities had been properly fulfilled. As his ship touched the dock and willing hands reached out to help secure the mooring lines, Bjorn felt the gentle transition from the solitude of the night journey to the companionship of community life. The trading season was over. The northern lights had provided their blessing on his safe return, and another cycle in the eternal rhythm of work and rest, adventure and homecoming was drawing to its peaceful close. The aurora would return again, perhaps tomorrow night, perhaps next week, following its own mysterious schedule that connected all the seasons of his life to the vast cosmic forces that governed the dance of lights across northern skies. For now, it was enough to know that he had witnessed one more magnificent performance in the ongoing pageant of natural beauty that made life in these northern lands a privilege despite its challenges. The gentle lapping of water against the harbor stones provided a quiet soundtrack to his homecoming, a peaceful counterpoint to the more dramatic sounds of wind and wave that had accompanied his travels. Soon he would be seated beside his own hearth, sharing stories of his journey with family and friends. But for a moment longer, he remained on deck, savoring the satisfaction of another successful voyage and the promise of rest that awaited him on shore. The northern lights had danced their ancient dance across the sky one more time, connecting him to all the generations of traders and travelers who had witnessed similar displays from these same waters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight had provided memories of beauty and wonder that would last a lifetime. The gentle merchant of the northern seas had returned home safely, carrying not just valuable cargo, but the timeless gift of experiences that transformed mere survival into something approaching wisdom. And as the full light of day finally claimed the sky, transforming the harbor from a place of magic and mystery into the familiar setting of daily work and community life, Bjorn allowed himself one last look at the northern horizon, where the aurora had painted its masterpiece in the darkness. The lights were gone now, invisible in the brightness of day, but their beauty remained in memory, a treasure more precious than any goods in his hold, a reminder that the world held wonders that no amount of silver could purchase and no cargo ship could carry, available freely to all who had the wisdom to pause in their busy lives and simply watch the dance of lights across the infinite sky.